Morgan. Welcome to my studio. This is my real studio. This is where I have made some of the Breyers that you probably might know of. Sorry. I also work on resins and all kinds of sculptures here within my studio. You will see me a lot talk about things out in the field, but honestly, I go out, I tend to take videos and photos, and then I come back into my studio and I, will look at them on my iPad, and I will look at them on my computer screen. I will print out printouts of them. A lot of making a sculpture comes from understanding the anatomy, but understanding it. I encourage all artists to go out and get actual video and photo of real horses instead of burying themselves being preoccupied with what the muscles look like, especially because when you take a real horse and you have this whole architecture, which is like a framework of a house, okay, and it's like when you first frame up a house, it doesn't really look like a house, and it can look like any kind of house depending on how you slap on all the things underneath it, the insulation, the siding, all those things. It's just the same with the horse. You take this framework of a skeleton, and yeah, there's different proportions and there are only certain ways it'll bend, but then you take all these muscles on, depending on the breed, depending on the age, the fitness, the strength even, at that particular moment, what the horse is putting the emphasis on. That is how that's going to look. And then what people don't seem to always kind of get from those anatomy books is that when you have your different muscles laid out, you don't always see things that would look entirely like that. That's not a particularly perfect example, but a lot of these horses, when you see, that's beautiful and it's good to understand, and especially if you own a horse, you want to understand the muscles that lay under it. But those muscles are entirely wrapped up by something that's almost like stockings. It's very clear connective tissue called fascia. It wraps around everything. It's very tight. It's very much like a sausage casing maybe, and it wraps around it all, and depending on how relaxed a horse is or how charged up a horse is, a lot of that's going to affect how a horse looks too. However, anatomy is important to understand because underneath all of that, there's only a few ways. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully, yeah. There's only a few ways a horse can bend. So one of the things I'm going to be doing in this video quite a bit is outlining parts of the body like this with terrible illustrations, sorry, in yellow for bone and red for what I'm calling the bending points or the pivot points. Instead of being points of articulation necessarily, sometimes like the shoulder there kind of smeared in red, or just sort of generically going here alongside the neck, I'm trying to say that there's pivoting happening in there. So now as we watch him move, you're seeing that point of shoulder move. That is a pivot point. It obviously articulates and bends, but as you look at it, the whole scapula there, and this horse is ideal for that, you can really see that there's just this crazy range of motion, and that's because the shoulder girdle is not attached, and so this horse has the ability to throw his arms forward. And the other thing I really like about this video is that even though he's going flat out, you can see there's only so far that humerus bone is going to come forward. So I think it's really important for artists to understand, even though we're looking at a skeleton, we can see the pivot points, but to actually see them in action and see how the limitations of the muscles, but also the exaggerations of the muscles allow for them to lift or bend more or less than you might think that they do just from studying anatomy on static cadaver photos and just even still photos. And I really think video gives us this so much better. So we're going to use our beautiful Bay Arabian again to illustrate one of the pitfalls that happens when you try and use photos. So we just saw him do a very quick action, and really to see it by eye, maybe if you can slow it down. There it is. I want to make a sculpture of this. Okay, let's pretend I want to make a sculpture of this. But now I don't really know where some of these shapes are. I know the face. Maybe I know where the neck parts go. Start to get to the shoulder, and I wonder what's happening because I can't really see this angle. I fill in a lot with things that I know. I know what the hooves obviously look like, and I can match those up. But then we start to get up into areas like the hip, and I go, oh, I hope I have this right. I can't really quite tell where the stifle is and what's going on, and the loin muscles. So understanding your anatomy is going to give you something, but also watching the video, watch this one more time. Watch, you can see the hip muscles as we're going up into the air. You can see how they flex. As he brings his stifle forward, you get an idea of what's going on in there. So you don't necessarily need to know with that photo. Watching from all different angles, look at the shoulder here, you see the back of the shoulder blade. It paddles like an oar, and you really see it only from above, or you can feel it, or if you're riding a horse, you can kind of touch that. The same with the hips. A lot of riders understand where their horse's legs are based on the movement through the hips, but to see it from above tells you quite a bit. We're going to look at that same horse from the side now, and I'm going to talk more about the actual bending points and how we guess. This horse has a pretty thick build, so he's actually really ideal for kind of guesstimating where things go, but I drew that badly, so just quickly, there's the elbow. I drew that in blue. And the gap here between the humerus and the scapula, that's kind of important to me. I didn't quite get it right there in the red spot. But just now watch when we bring his leg forward, these bending points and this sort of area in there that I just highlighted in red. Okay, when I say the shoulder girdle isn't attached, I mean it's attached by all the sinew and muscle. See that? That's the before and after movement overlaid. So my bone painting on the black horse isn't quite perfect. The point of shoulder isn't quite as obvious in real life as it would look with the bones, but what a good boy. So here we're seeing a nice slow motion, high resolution image, hopefully. It's got all this fabulous detail under the jaw, and I tell people just look at the shapes, outline the shapes, sculpt from the shapes. But really what I'm saying when I say that is also understand underneath what's going on. So the back of the bones of the jaw, where those muscles come in on either side of the throat. These are the things that you want to understand what you're looking at so you can create those shapes. Okay. Here's where it gets complicated. In order to sculpt a horse neck well, you really need to understand where it's coming from. So I've started here by outlining the bony part and the two main muscles that I think are the most important to understand. You can see that they're prominent. I'm highlighting them in pink here. In different breeds, you're going to see them later. You'll see two different breeds that show that this area can have totally different conformation. That yellow right there is the cervical vertebrae number 1, the atlas, and you can actually see that. And then I'm outlining in yellow the back of the head, and then where the bone of the skull attaches, green, is the ear and the ear bulb. There's a lot of structures in that spot. One of my favorite books here is actually not an anatomy book, but physical therapy book. I like to show that some of these work in concert, so I'm just giving you some reference and bony points here because they're going to keep showing up. You're going to actually be able to see in some moving horses coming up the bony points there, that white spot around the occipital bone cervical vertebrae area. So just watch Bailey here as he lowers his head, and you can see that bulge. I like to think of it like a little football shape. That's right up by the ear. This next horse, Henry, here has a pink atlas and a blue axis. Again, those are just very low mobility bones, and I just kind of tried to overlay them for that. So when you're going to watch a horse later, this buckskin scratching himself in this position, you're going to see that be kind of locked. And it's important to understand that when flexing your horse's head. Coming out of the chest, you want to understand where that's coming from. Those are two key pivot points. So let's just watch start this guy who's, easy to see because he's white. Lower his head, look behind his ears, notice the dent that you're seeing. He's a different breed, a lighter breed. So where those first two cervical vertebrae are coming out of his head, as you look at this, you can also see where his neck is coming out of his shoulder. So I'm going to highlight his shoulder for you. You're going to kind of just in your head, like imagine where the cervical vertebrae come down to the pole. Okay, and I'm doing the skull here in yellow. That X there and that circle are up in the pole area, and I've highlighted those two main areas. The blue, again, is an actual bony structure that is going to give you a really good frame of reference. The pink is called the nuchal ligament. It's very much like imagining a marionette string, perhaps, in puppetry, kind of helping the head lower and up. It's described as elastic, but the elastic part runs more along the crest. This is also described as sheet-like. So let's just watch a mock-up of the head being lowered. And so we're going to look in a minute at real horses and just imagine how that sort of works. When you see that coming out of the neck, do you see how that sort of acts like a sail or a puppetry being lowered? And that's why you see that flatness. And understanding where the cervical vertebrae are coming out of the base of the neck are also going to help you. And again, those first two cervical vertebrae right behind the back of the head here, and that blue is not inserted quite properly, but in that area represent these sort of football shape here. So you have your deep muscles of the pole, and we have two different breeds here. The gaited horse is black, and he has a much more defined area back there. He has a much more up-headed, and you see a bigger dent in this. So that's also breed specific. Just keep in mind, again, that the blue should be coming out more towards the top of the skull there. However, the first couple of vertebrae are pretty stiff and tight, and you see it sort of football shaped here in this illustration overlay. But now watch it in slow motion. As this horse lifts his head, you're seeing that sort of bend there, and you have like a number of equestrian terms for this, I guess I'll say, for riding, but essentially you have less mobility in that particular joint area. So keep in mind the cervical vertebrae coming out of the shoulder and where they come out in reference to the shoulder blades themselves, and then again where the cervical vertebrae come out of the skull. That's really important to be able to visualize. And then the nuchal ligament will help you make sure, as you observe horses, that you add enough crest but not too much. So here we have an example of the horse twisting around, and you can really see how a breed that is not particularly cresty, this is a quarter horse, how the actual nuchal ligament structure can kind of be visualized. And also you have a really good idea here too, I hope, from this as to where in the shoulder the neck bones originate coming out. And this horse, of course, has a lower headset, so I think it's important that you keep in mind those muscles you see bulging usually are supporting muscles of the neck, except for up by the pole. So again, watching the skinnier horse, would watch him turn away for a second. You can see where that neck bone inserts by the shoulder right about here. And just keeping that in mind when we go back and look at the buckskin now, the other muscles we are seeing are thicker, pulling, supporting muscles. He says hello. Use as many references as you can get. That's my best recommendation. Okay, and now we're going to watch that horse in slow motion. It's a different time of year, so he's got a slightly browner coat. But look at all that fleshy muscle move, all that rippling. Very different from our Arabian. You can't really see his point of shoulder. You can't really see his scapula outlined. Everything, from the hip to the neck. There's a lot going on. And he's also a gaited breed, so he kind of does not have what we would call pure gait. So now he's got a nice diagonal trot going on. But he gets out of sequence a little bit here and there. You saw that in the canter too, so there. But the other thing about this breed is that he's very what they call pigeon-breasted, which means that his sternum comes a lot more far forward. And so we're going to just pause and look here and try and decide our pivot points based on this. I'm treating it pretty much the way I would bend any kind of wire armature. And in fact, I have done that. Anybody recognize this guy? Not quite as much squat down behind, but so again, we're going to be looking at these different pivot points that I outlined before, just in reference with the different horse. So this guy has a much more up-headed build than some of the other horses we've looked at. It's very narrow up at the pole. The range of motion is just crazy through the shoulder. I always tell people to pick this sort of like outline the surface shapes so they can sort of see what the gaps are. So the ear bulb, the back of the skull, the pole area, the wing of the atlas at the pole area is the other neon green line. I think it's important to realize that this is one of those gaited breeds that would be shown with his head very up-headed, and you typically see them flex quite a steep flex at their pole there. So that's one of the reasons I picked this particular pose, is that you can see that the throat latch there doesn't have much of a gap, and the angle is really, really tight, what I'm outlining there in red. It's almost the most extreme you're likely to see a horse do this on its own. And obviously he is, tucking his head up like that on his own. And the neck set is a little bit higher. And again, like I said, down there, the tuck in, deciding where the pivot points are going to help you decide where the back of the jaw is going to meet the neck. We'll look at that in a minute, moving some of the skulls. But I really wanted to just focus on this shoulder here, because this guy has such an unusual shoulder. He has a crazy range of motion in his shoulder. And you're just going to see, where I pause it here for a second, the outline of the muscle, look at it again, coming around the humerus. It's just the gaited horse thing. It's pretty impressive. Let's just take a big quick look, remind ourselves what we're talking about. So I'm going to show the, in blue here, the back of the elbows, because I kind of want to focus on those, because when you bend between the humerus and the lower limbs, those elbows really stick out. In fact, this guy has exceptionally prominent elbows. That's a whole nother story. And again, red is your pivot point. The humerus bone drawn very poorly. And another pivot point, and the elbow kind of branches back like that. And that's a really tough one for people, so I kind of wanted to pause it here so we could take a quick look. I've drawn 2 lines there for the knee because kind of bends as a block, and the pastern in red. And again, just sort of vague pivoting, rotating of the oar-like motion of the scapula. And that's really the best way I can describe it, I think, is I think if you go and feel a horse's shoulder, you're going to discover that it's a very oar-like rotation pivot. But notice how the alignment of that shoulder
is about as forward as you're ever going to see on most horses. And also, he has a tremendous amount of flex through his back. It's that he can rotate his hips down under him and flex his stifle area there. So you're also going to see that when he's got his leg directly underneath him, his hip is at the highest point here. Many nuances.
Okay, so I'm not kidding. Play is really, really important for artists. Doing things like this, making cutouts, moving things around, exploring, getting creative, doing it with friends, but also just trying different angles, moving things around. I sometimes will use like horse pictures or illustrations as well. Different angles. Look at your horses all over the place. So I put these cutouts on Wyatt and Bobby Joe. Here it's on Wyatt for fun. In the background, I noticed that my video there of Percy rearing and bouncing up and down, it's fabulous. And, you know, looking at Wyatt's pectoral muscles, well, Percy's a thoroughbred. He's not going to have the same. Look at him go. He's so fresh. But, you know, they have the same anatomy, even though Percy's a thoroughbred and Wyatt's a quarter horse. You know, these kinds of comparisons are sometimes helpful, especially if you have a lighter breed to look at and you can really see what the underlying anatomy is doing. Then you can extrapolate over that and go, okay, but I know my quarter horse has these muscles here, and then you start to compare what's going on breed specific wise. But absolutely, all the different angles, play around, turn, twist, follow along, do just like you did when you were a kid, you know? Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Play will help you bring out the animation in them, I promise. So, I hope that wasn't too boring. I strongly urge you to go out and buy anatomy books. Please don't misunderstand and think that I don't think that they're incredibly necessary, but I do think that understanding motion of anatomy, understanding how things work in concert, as well as understanding where your scaffolding is, where your muscles, where your muscles go, I think all of that's key. But your best resource is going to be videos like this, using your phone, using your iPad, whatever you can get your hands on, and watching horses move and understanding how those bony points are supporting, and yet the fascia, the muscles, all of that ripples together in concert and creates this beautiful, elegant machine that we love, that is the horse.